Kamala's polling is up, and it's up everywhere. It's up in everything except Trafalgar, I think, has her down a point, which is like as a right wing pollster you can get, and that is not good for Donald Trump. That is very, very bad for Donald Trump. Here you can see a conglomeration of different polls and the averages taken together, showing her to have a plus 2.2 lead nationally, which is just about to go outside the margin of error. Actually, I think it might already slightly be outside the margin of error. Point is, it's becoming a point where it is undeniable that Kamala has the lead. Now, this is the national presidential polling average, and to be honest with you, while this is a good general radar, and if somebody's up 10 points or down 10 points, and give you a good idea of who's going to win, when you get to a margin of 1 to 2%, this will not necessarily tell you who is going to win where. You're going to have to look at more indicators, especially when you talk about the swing states that are necessary for you to get to 270 electoral college votes to win. I'm talking Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, if we're still treating it like a swing state, Nevada. You get the idea. And you can look at other polling indicators, of course. For example, who has the mental and cognitive health capacity to serve as president? This is a YouGov poll from August 2nd. Harris, 64, says they do. 51 for Trump. Meaning that Trump is at 50-50 if he has the mental capacity to serve as president, while most people think that Kamala Harris does have the capacity, with 1/3 saying no. I'm interested to think about what those 1/3, when they say they don't, what they're coming from. Maybe they think that, like, maybe they're falling into, oh, she's inexperienced, the quote-unquote DEI higher narrative, whatever it is, who knows. But that's a poll that obviously is good for Harris, considering the last candidate was performing worse than Trump. And now Trump, the 78-year-old nominee, the oldest nominee for president in American history, is now the old man. And when he slips up at press conferences like he did recently, fumbling and mumbling on his words, saying delirious stuff, then that's going to lead more into that narrative. It's going to make it worse and worse and worse for him, just like it did for Joe Biden with time. Also, a part of the voting population that Kamala is performing very well with, according to the polls, is also saying that they're more likely to turn out to vote than they were just a few weeks ago. On July 18th, only 58% of black registered voters said that they will definitely vote. Now the number is 74%, a really good indicator for Kamala Harris. And it's not just with black voters, there's also with Democrats overall. And when you poll enthusiasm amongst Democrats to vote, that is way, way, way up. Way up. Now, that doesn't necessarily translate into independence, but that does translate into fundraising potential, with Kamala now leading Donald Trump in fundraising potential after Joe Biden had kind of, reeled them way behind after some time in the lead. We also, when talking about those swing states, we're seeing Kamala up in Michigan. We're seeing Kamala up clearly, especially now with Tim Walz, in Minnesota. We're seeing Kamala up in Pennsylvania in a majority of polls. I think we have her up like 2 points in majority polls, sometimes more. We have her up also now in Nevada, with her biggest lead over Donald Trump yet. A new poll of likely Nevada voters found Vice President Kamala Harris with a nearly 6 percentage point lead over former President Donald Trump, the largest lead for a Democrat in any presidential poll of Nevada this cycle. While Nevada polls have been relatively scarce since Harris replaced Joe Biden as Democratic nominee, the vice president appears to have closed the gap that existed between Trump and Biden, who had not led Trump in a single public poll taken in the state since October of 2023. A Bloomberg Morning Consultant poll of Nevada in late July found Harris with just a 2 percentage point lead in the head-to-head matchup with Donald Trump. And I mean, that was just a 2 percentage point lead then. And now it's a 6 percentage point lead now. So that's a 4-point jump in that time. And this is just one poll. And there are other polls as well. But the polls seem to generally indicate Kamala in a positive upswing. And as Kamala's in a positive upswing, her campaign is keeping on the pressure on the Republicans' new vice presidential nominee, as now the Democrats have now nominated somebody, with them releasing this audio of J.D. Vance, along with a bunch of other pieces of old audio of J.D. Vance saying things about, motherless cat ladies and how people without children should have less voting rights and all this crazy, crazy stuff. And when you have audio like this being spammed around everywhere.
But I also think, there's something comparable, between abortion and slavery, in that.
And this guy, if Donald Trump dies at the age of 78, which is a possibility, a real possibility, he's the oldest president in American history if he gets reelected. And he's the oldest nominee for president in American history already. If that happens, and this is the scenario that Americans are thinking about, that's going to push them away from voting for Donald Trump, is the possibility of this man being on the ticket, being in the White House, and eventually being president of the United States. This is on top of Donald Trump stumbling in the face of these attacks, of being called weird, of the aggression from the Kamala campaign. And they're just not ready to shift the messaging towards Joe Biden. They're not, towards Kamala Harris, with most of their attacks still being focused on Joe Biden. If you see a Donald Trump rally as of recent, and there's a lot less of him, he's campaigning less, might be because he's tired and he's old, might be because he just had a near-death experience where he was almost shot in the head, and he might be messed up, which is a real possibility. I gotta tell you, when you have a near-death experience, it can mess you up for days to weeks at a time. Just saying. So, that's a possibility too. Or it could just be that he doesn't want to. He could be lazy, playing golf. Who knows what it is? But the campaign events he is doing, he can't focus just on Kamala. He keeps going back to Joe Biden. He really wants to run against Joe Biden, to the point where Republicans were even calling it like a coup. A coup that Joe Biden stepped aside, even though all of them were saying that Joe Biden can't even lead the country. Then, okay, we'll have Kamala instead, and they're angry. So Kamala Harris has a much big coffer now. The fundraisers they did broke records. The first 24-hour fundraiser, they got over $100 million. That broke records. They got over $300-something million for the month of July. August, the numbers are still coming in, but I know in the fallout of her picking Tim Walz to be her VP, they raised another $37 million. They're raising millions in between. We're not even counting super PAC money. So they got money. And now they got money. They need to introduce Kamala Harris to the country before the Republicans introduce Kamala Harris for them. And so these are the ads that Kamala Harris is running in swing states, focusing on issues like border security, which is a hot topic this election, polls as one of the top 3 issues.
Kamala Harris has spent decades fighting violent crime. As a border state prosecutor, she took on drug cartels and jailed gang members for smuggling weapons and drugs across the border. As vice president, she backed the toughest border control bill in decades. And as president, she will hire thousands more border agents and crack down on fentanyl and human trafficking. Fixing the border is tough. So is Kamala Harris.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Okay, that's one ad. Here's another one. This one's more like personal family stuff, less record.
She grew up in a middle-class home. She was the daughter of a working mom, and she worked at McDonald's while she got her degree. Kamala Harris knows what it's like to be middle class. It's why she's determined to lower healthcare costs and make housing more affordable. Donald Trump has no plan to help the middle class, just more tax cuts for billionaires. Being president is about who you fight for, and she's fighting for people like you.
I'm Kamala.
So the first thing about these ads, number one, this ad is done by the guy who plays Caesar in New Vegas.
Kamala Harris has spent decades fighting violent crime. As a border state prosecutor, she took on...
Isn't it? It's the guy who played Caesar in New Vegas. It's the same voice. It's the same exact voice. So that's the first thing. So that's already like you're playing my heartstrings there. With you're appealing to my video game taste. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that this is the issue Democrats poll the worst on, and this is the Kamala trying to get a front foot. Kamala Harris has been painted, and to some degree, it's kind of complicated. Point is, Kamala Harris did help around the issue of the border, is tied to the Biden administration, and so the Republicans are going to try to make the border her issue, that she and her administration caused the border, while Kamala Harris's campaign is countering with, hey, she's a prosecutor. She knows how to handle these issues. She's cracked down on the cartels before, and that border bill that Donald Trump shot down that would have helped stem some of the tide of the flow over the border, she was in favor of that. She was in favor of the toughest bill in a while to be proposed. She was in favor of that. The James Lankford bill, the conservative James Lankford. And that's going to be the counter. So that's the back and forth you're going to see. It's going to be the crisis on the border is your fault, and then Democrats are going to respond, you want the problem to be there for electoral reasons. You didn't vote. You didn't vote against the bill. I mean, you shot down the bill that would have helped this issue, and then the Republicans will respond, well, that wouldn't have helped enough. And the Democrats would have responded, well, it would have helped some, and you get the general idea of the back and forth that we're going to see in the media over this. But this is Kamala Harris trying to get a front foot on this issue. The other one is, I mean, of course, you want to introduce your candidate's personal side to the American people, I guess, and talking about a billionaire protecting billionaires. Pretty basic messaging. It's not hard to piece together. I do want to say that this campaign is a lot more in the mudslinging, and like really, I would say almost like cold calling, like all of Donald Trump's failures or face plants or mess ups, or anytime Donald Trump stumbles, and it doesn't have to be a major stumble, but anytime Donald Trump stumbles, the Kamala team is like there to immediately pick it up, immediately bang on it, immediately be like, oh, God, and bring attention to it. One purpose is, of course, to like get the public to see the failures, but I think a lot of the purpose also is to maybe get under Trump's skin. Because they're really on game on this. They're really on point with this. Let me show you just one example of it. Breaking. This is from Kamala Wins. It's a campaign account. It scores Kamala Harris's wins in office. It changed itself from Biden wins. That's what it was before. Following Donald Trump's disastrous press conferences, Joe Rogan and Tim Pool, two of Trump's strongest supporters, have announced they are not voting for Donald Trump. Trump's campaign is collapsing. Now, this is only partially true. Tim Pool did say that he was not going to vote for Donald Trump, but he then retracted it and said, actually, it was a meme. I was joking. Lamau, 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 tee-hee-hee, tee-hee-hee. I don't really think it's funny at all. But Joe Rogan did. Joe Rogan did say he was no longer supporting Donald Trump. Here it is right here. And he was going to support RFK, actually.
That's just what they do. That's politics. They do it on the left. They do it on the right. They gaslight you. They manipulate you. They promote narratives. And the only one who's not doing that is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
You a fan?
Yeah, I am a fan. Yeah, he's the only one that makes sense.
He promotes narratives. He promotes anti-Ukraine narratives. He promotes anti-vaccine narratives. He promotes all sorts of narratives.
To me, he's the only one that he doesn't attack people. He attacks actions and ideas, but he's much more reasonable and intelligent. I mean, the guy was an environmental attorney and cleaned up the East River. I mean, he's a legitimate guy. You know, before anybody started calling him an anti-vaxxer, which I thought he was too. I thought he was this nut, this like conspiracy theorist nut, until I read his book. I read The Real Anthony Fauci, and I'm like, what is it? How much of this is real? Because if it's all real, this is fucking insane, and we live in a world where we're being manipulated by these health organizations that are being paid by the pharmaceutical drug interests, and these pharmaceutical drug companies are pumping these products out into the population and telling us that we need them, and then making insane amounts of money. And then also the government is in on it, and also they share a patent with Moderna, and also they share profits, and there's $700 million, I mean, however much money was made, whatever the number is that these guys made off of these products. Like, this is, all of it is fucking crazy.
Okay, point is, because of the big drug companies or whatever dumb reason, and I don't want to be too mean to Joe, but come on, RFK is not going to challenge the drug companies. He is not going to do it. He doesn't know how to legislate. He doesn't know anything about politics. He's got no shot in hell of winning anyway. Whatever. Joe Rogan has decided to throw his vote away, and because he's throwing his vote away, there's a good chance that a lot of his followers might end up throwing their vote away. Not necessarily. Some of them will probably go on voting for Donald Trump. I believe a few might even go on to vote for Kamala Harris. Probably less than the ones voting for Donald Trump, but that is the case. So Joe Rogan endorsed RFK, told his supporters to throw their vote away. Now, if you are a candidate and a celebrity that you wish endorsed somebody else, what do you do in that situation? Now, it might hurt, but the best thing to do is probably just take it on the chin. Ow, it hurts. I wish you endorsed me. Instead, you endorsed the other guy. It is what it is. Celebrities don't know anything about politics anyway, yada, 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 yada. That would be the smart thing to do. That is not what Donald Trump decided to do in response to being told that the biggest, let me remind you guys, the biggest podcast host in the United States, the man who hosts more he gets more people to watch his silly little show than anyone else. And this is what he decided to say about him. It will be interesting to see how loudly Joe Rogan gets booed the next time he enters the UFC ring. MAGA 2024. Not everyone is that focused in Donald Trump. And the UFC probably has more people on average compared to other sports who like Trump, you know, watching the UFC in UFC arenas. Trump gets a pretty positive reception at UFC arenas. But people are not going to put Donald Trump before fight night. And people are not going to put Donald Trump before Joe Rogan because he's goddamn Joe Rogan, okay? And people cannot imagine anybody else's voice commentating over the UFC but Joe Rogan because he's Joe Rogan. And so trying to put yourself over Joe Rogan to UFC fans is of losing effort. So, Governor Tim Walz. Kamala chose Tim Walz. Honestly speaking with you guys, I'm just going to be biased from the front here. I wanted Tim Walz. This was the pick I wanted ever since I heard he was in the running. I wanted Tim Walz. I wanted Tim Walz for a few reasons, okay? Let me sell you on Tim Walz before I tell you the disadvantages on Tim Walz as a Tim Walz guy, okay? First thing is Tim Walz checks all the boxes that the Kamala Hamp implicitly thought they needed. A straight white guy, maybe old, not necessary, but they filled all those checks. He also is from the Midwest, which is a check that also helps. He's also from Minnesota, which isn't exactly a swing state, but is a semi-swing state, and is close enough to swing states that it might have an impact. So it clicked enough boxes that it got him in the running. And then when he did the weird attack, I don't know if you've been seeing Democrats going after Republicans saying they're weird, they're weird, they're weird. This was started by Tim Walz. He was in an interview, I don't know if it was Fox and Friends or some other program, but he called them weird and it caught on after they started pushing it in press releases. And they noticed that those press releases and the donation stuff where they used the weird attack would return bigger and bigger donations for the Tim Walz fundraisers for his own political stuff. And so it started to catch on, it started to build, and the weird thing really put him in the running. Really put him in the running to put him in front of the Kamala camp and made him a considered candidate. So it checks off all the boxes. He was able, to deal with the media quite well. He already came up with a good, quick, snappy attack. All positive stuff for Tim Walz. But Tim Walz also is an experienced legislator. He's got 20 years in the House. He's got time as governor of Minnesota, where he passed a progressive agenda, $1 billion invested into housing. We've got marijuana legalization, 1/3 of child poverty getting cut down during the COVID pandemic, mind you. 1/3 of child poverty getting cut down. Free school lunches, universality in free school lunches, meaning no means testing, anything like that. And that's just a few of the things that he's accomplished. There's other stuff he's accomplished too. I'm just naming the things off the top of my head. And then you add the fact that the unions love him. And when I say the unions love him, I mean UAW is having a party.
President Andrew Jackson beat his assassin with a cane and the Secret Service had to pull him off the assassin.
Look, Andrew Jackson is not the nicest American president, but he certainly is not a man you would want to catch the ire of, okay? If you see his eyes start to twitch, you should probably stay away. Scary dude, scary dude. But UAW loves him. He's very pro-union. Mark Kelly, he was one of the picks that were being considered. He didn't even support the PRO Act, the pro-union PRO Act, until he got pressure during the competition to be Harris's VP pick to support it. And so a lot of the unions were hesitant on Mark Kelly. Shapiro apparently was reportedly hesitant to take the job and leave Philadelphia, but was also she was getting warnings from John Fetterman and warnings from others that Shapiro might be too ambitious and might actually try to overshine Kamala Harris during the presidential campaign, and you do not want to outshine the person that is at the top of the ticket. That is not a smart way to win. When people are filling in the thing on the paper, your name is smaller as a VP pick. You are not the big name, so you got to promote the big name if you want to win the election. It's pretty basic. There's also some other problems with Shapiro. There was some like looming crises and scandals around sexual harassment in his office. There were some other scandals that were looming that many people could probably go out and look at themselves. But Walz campaigned for it hard from the outside. He campaigned for it hard from the outside as a nice Midwest Democrat who has 24 years of National Guard's experience in the military, is a former public school teacher, beloved by unions, popular Minnesota governor who is able to legislate well with a slim majority. And when you're Kamala Harris, you're not just thinking about who can help you win. And I think that Tim Walz can help provide the positive message, the positive agenda the Democrats need to counter Donald Trump. Not just, hey, we're not Donald Trump. We're not the orange man. We're not him. But here's our agenda. Free school lunches. Here's our agenda. Here's how we're accomplish it. Here's a record of what it looks like when it's accomplished. People like it in Minnesota. Why wouldn't they like it across the whole country? We've legalized pot in Minnesota. Let's legalize pot federally. We talked about free school lunches in Minnesota. Let's talk about free school lunches federally for the whole country, for every child. So nobody goes to school hungry. So everybody can concentrate on math and science and reading instead of being hungry and when they're going to be able to get their next meal. So I think he can offer that positive agenda, even if he isn't the most he's not from a specific swing state. I think offering that positive agenda, him just being a generally likable guy, and I'm saying this, and I'm sure I could show you a million different clips of him being very likable, of him being a dad working on the car, of him doing carnival rides with his family. I mean, it's not hard to make a 24-year National Guardsman who likes to hunt and fish from Minnesota, public school teacher. Like, this guy look bad. He's just been launched to national prominence. He already has a positive favorability rating, 41% to 30%. This is a YouGov poll from August 8th. Now, there's still a chunk of people who are unsure, but that chunk is going to continue to shrink as people continue to learn about Tim Walz. And I think he's going to have a pretty good net positive approval rating. Mind you, JD Vance is negative 20 right now. JD Vance has like a 25% favorability rating, and Tim Walz is already knocked you out of the park. So on that level, Tim Walz is already trouncing JD Vance. It's just a more likable alternative option to President of the United States, which is the primary job of VP, is to be the alternative if the president goes down. And mind you, this guy has years of experience in Congress, 24 years in the National Guard, public school teacher, beloved by unions, pretty likable guy. Other people in Congress even like him, to the point where Larry Hogan, the conservative Republican candidate here in Maryland, running against Angela Alsobrooks in my district, he, once Tim Walz was announced to be the VP pick, was saying how great Tim Walz is because he's such a personable guy. And so now you're going to have to see a bunch of people who would have talked about how personable Tim Walz is come out and pretend he's the devil. But it's seemingly not working so far because he has a positive net approval rating of 11 points. So that's good for him. But JD Vance is still down in the dirt with 25, so bad for him. But Tim Walz, I think, is going to bring something good to the campaign. A positive message, and, of course, more favorability than JD Vance. JD Vance comes off as very inauthentic. He was against Trump until very recently, comparing Trump to heroin, comparing Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler, going hard against Trump, calling himself a never-Trumper. Then he flipped, got Trump's endorsement, became senator, didn't finish one term, and is now VP pick, inexperienced, unlikable, panders to far-right podcast, picks on popular positions that are making people not like him. And this is the guy that he's now facing down on the other side. I think that we got a good pick here in comparison to that, even if it's not from, say, Pennsylvania. And so I think Tim Walz is a good pick for offering a positive agenda. I think he's a good pick for battling the inauthenticity of JD Vance when we're talking about a guy who's a public school teacher here, who's had his positions in Congress for 20 plus years. You can look at his agenda. You can look at Tim Walz, and Tim Walz has always been Tim Walz. I think he's a good counter on the authenticity angle. And ultimately, I think that if Kamala wins, this is somebody that's going to help Kamala Harris much more than JD Vance is going to help Donald Trump. JD Vance doesn't know how to govern. JD Vance doesn't know basically anything about politics. He's been in politics for 2 years. He doesn't know anything about it, really, when it comes to actually, like, pulling the levers of power. This is the guy who's been pulling the levers of power in Congress for 20 years. This is a guy who is quite, connected well with Nancy Pelosi and others, and the lever pullers, the people who know how to get things done. He has passed a progressive agenda with a slim majority in Minnesota, so he has a progressive background you can point to of success of getting things done, which is not necessarily something you could have said of past progressives that were getting pushed on the national level, like Bernie Sanders, when it comes to like getting stuff done with slim majorities. So I think that he's not only a good candidate for winning, he's a good candidate for governing, which, as from talking from a VP pick perspective, most people are just concentrating on the winning, but we also need to concentrate on the governing. And I think this is the perfect pick for somebody like Kamala Harris, considering that she's going to possibly, if best case scenario, if they win and they get back the House, they keep the Senate, keep the presidency, they're going to have a slim majority, and having somebody with experience in how to govern a slim majority is going to be useful. So I'm also happy with how progressive Tim Walz is in comparison to the other options. So I'm quite satisfied with this pick. I think it's a good VP pick, and right-wingers are not super excited about this. I got a few of the more interesting responses I've seen. This is from Joey Manarino, who's a weird, crazy person on the internet, who's a big Trumper. You dressed your dog up in gay clothes and brought him to a pride parade. In response to Tim Walz. From the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, Tim Walz has been a leech his entire life. Public school teacher, politician, veteran. Keep up these attacks. They're devastating, absolutely devastating. On the left is Somalia's flag. On the right is Minnesota's new state flag that Tim Walz revealed in January. They had like a public poll. The public voted on what the flag would be, and this is the flag that won. He turned his home state into Somalia, and now he wants to do the same to our country. And Elon Musk responded, as if this was somehow a coherent and a point deserving of attention, and not the ramblings of a crazy person flinging feces at you in public. My goodness. My goodness. I will also say, can I give an honorable mention to Ben Shapiro, who did a reference to Tim Walz. He found a picture of Tim Walz where he was especially overweight. It was a picture of Tim Walz when he was, especially hefty, because he's a hefty guy. And the caption was, he looks like he lives in a van down by the river. And it was a reference to the old SNL skit with Chris Farley, where he plays a man who lives in a van down by the river. And I was thinking, man, what a devastating attack. Comparing Tim Walz to universally hated American Chris Farley. What could go wrong? They got to find some new attacks on this guy, because the stolen valor shit isn't going to fly, and Chris Farley isn't going to fly. As a Minnesota resident, I was hoping for a better flag, not going to lie. Honestly, yeah, it's not my flag either. I'm not a big fan of it, but I'm from Maryland, and we got the best flag ever of any state ever in the history of ever.